Good morning, everyone.
All right.
We're going to be in Luke chapter 16 in just a minute, so if you want to turn there in your Bibles, that would be great to follow along. As you know, I just got back from a trip to Greece, and we went over to Rome, finished up there. And one of the things that you notice when you go outside of the U.S. is how blessed we are financially. I mean, especially in Greece, they have gone through some significant economic challenges in recent times, and it really shows. I mean, many people are just struggling to get by, and in fact, the unemployment among their young people is at a staggering amount, and many are having to leave the country because they can't survive, or they're moving in with their parents and trying to live. There's just not enough jobs. But here in America, of course, we're blessed with a great deal of wealth. But that wealth can be, of course, both a blessing and a curse. And so you might remember before I left that we were in this series on idols. And so we're going to talk about wealth as an idol today. I think everyone could probably agree that at times possessions and stuff, wealth can become an idol, that money can take the place of or serve as a god. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, I think wealth appeals to us on a fairly fundamental or basic level. One of our primary instincts, of course, is for security. Nobody likes to live from day to day or meal to meal not knowing, if they're going to be able to eat that day. We like to know that there's going to be food on the table, that there's going to be a roof over our heads. We like to have a steady job and a regular income. And this was the job of the gods in the ancient world, to provide for people. And so people worshiped the gods because they felt that they would be blessed because of it. And so they would give offerings so that their crops would grow and their children would be healthy and so forth. So oftentimes the gods served that purpose. And today, wealth is what oftentimes gives us a sense of security. Right? It causes us to believe that we can actually control the world around us, that we can fight off the uncertainties that sometimes life presents us. And so people try to acquire more and more wealth so that they'll feel more secure and that they'll feel in control. But also, I think there's another reason wealth can slip in and become an idol for us, and that's that it's somehow oddly comforting, at least for a while, or more accurately, I should say, perhaps the process of buying can become a comfort to us. It makes us feel better. I mean, some people fight off depression this way. They get depressed, and so they go out shopping for new things. And sometimes this serves as a reward for us. I mean, have you ever gone and bought yourself something because you say, I deserve this since I just, experienced X, and you think about a hard situation that you were involved in. It provides that kind of little rush when you purchase something new, at least temporarily, and it gives you some endorphins in your system, and you're like all excited, and then that will eventually fade. So people will, when they get depressed, they'll go shopping, either at the mall or now, of course, we don't even have to leave the home. We can go online. And then there's, thirdly, this kind of unspoken, unknown attraction of new things. I don't know what exactly it is. But have you ever gone to a car dealership and you go in and you look at the cars and they're shiny, the paint's without imperfection, there's no dents, and then you sit in there and you smell that new car smell. It's just a distinctive smell. And then all of a sudden you're thinking, my 5-year-old car just doesn't cut it. I need a new car. I don't know what it is. It's like your car's working fine, but you go in there and somehow you become suddenly dissatisfied. Or you could name anything, really. Something that you already have that works perfectly fine, but you see the newer version of it, like an iPhone, and you're like, wow, that screen's a little bigger. It's a little shinier. It doesn't have that crack that I got when I dropped my phone. And you want it. And I don't know what that is that causes us to feel that way. I mean, even if you're just window shopping and you're not planning on buying anything, the heart begins to palpitate a little faster, and you look at all the gizmos and gadgets and you think, wow, that'd be great if I had that. And we all have our weak spots. I mean, for some people it might be like shoes. I do not have a weak spot for shoes, but some people look at shoes and go, I gotta have that. You know, and I feel superior because I'm like, I know, I don't need that. But then you give me something that I'm weak for, you know, maybe like a power tool or an electronic gadget. I'm like, I need to have that. You know, we all have our response, whether it's movies or antiques or collectibles, whatever it is, you've got that thing that you really like. And when you see it, you're like, I need that. I want that. And you won't be satisfied until you get it. What is it about that? So there's that discontent within us. And so this morning we want to explore, at least through this one text in Luke chapter 16, the relationship that a Christian has, or should have, I should say, with possessions. Now this is a strange text to some, especially because its hero seems to be an unscrupulous and devious manager. And the parable illustrates a fundamental message that is throughout Luke's gospel. So we're going to look at this text, but then we're also going to see how it fits into what Luke's doing actually throughout his story. And so as we begin to explore this text, one of the things I want us to remember about it as we go through it is that it is a parable. It's not a story about a real life situation. And so when you deal with parables, Jesus has freedom to add in certain elements that might be hard to believe. In fact, those are actually in there for a purpose. And so in our particular story, one of the things that's going to be hard to believe is that this manager, that the rich man is actually going to praise this unscrupulous manager. But we'll see why that happens in a minute. So Jesus constructs the story to help us focus in on something that's really important about the way we deal with possessions. So with that in mind, let's look at the story. Again, you can follow along in Luke 16, but I'm going to maybe do a more modified version of it. Okay, bring it into the contemporary situation. So we have this rich guy Jesus wants to talk about. He's a rich guy that's so rich he can't be bothered with the minor minutiae of life. And so he gets a business manager to take care of his resources, of his stuff. And that gives him more free time to go about things that are important to him, like golfing or sailing his boat on the Sea of Galilee. And then a report comes to him that his manager isn't doing such a great job, that he's squandering his property. Now, at this point in the story, there's no suggestion or at least hint that it's criminal behavior, perhaps. It's simply that he's not doing a very good job, that he's squandering his wealth, wasting his possessions. And so the rich man calls the manager in and he gives him his 30-day notice. And he says, you can't be my manager anymore. So get the books in order. You got 30 days. Get out of here. So the manager leaves. Now, the manager, of course, is quite depressed by this situation. He's about to be out of a job. And evidently, the wastefulness regarding his master's property is also true of his own resources, because it seems like he has nothing saved for a rainy day and that he's going to be out on his ear and not know what to do. So he, again, tries to think about situations that he could find after his unemployment. And because this is a parable and not real life, only two particular options come to mind. One is begging, and the other is digging. Now you might be thinking, well, but couldn't he become a manager on a caravan or something? Or could he, maybe perhaps open a restaurant? And okay, this isn't real life. This is a parable. So there's only two options, begging and ditch digging. And he thinks about the digging, and he's like, well, manual labor really isn't my thing. I don't think I'm physically fit enough to take care of that. That's not a real option. And begging, that's too much a strike against my pride. I don't think I want to do that either. And so he's like, okay, what do I do? So he comes up with a plan. And as we'll see, it's a rather devious and unscrupulous plan. He calls in his master's debtors. Now, we only in the story get two of them, but the impression you're supposed to get is that there's lots of these, right? And so he calls in his master's debtors one at a time, and he changes the amount of their debt. So he asks the first guy, how much do you owe my master? And the guy says, well, 100 jugs of olive oil. Well, that's a pretty significant debt. And so the manager looks around. He's looking around, who's watching us? And he says, quick, sit down and change your bill to 50 jugs. Well, of course, the debtor is quite delighted by this, and he goes away happy. And then he calls in the second guy. And he says, well, how much do you owe? Well, 100 containers of wheat. And so the manager tells him, quick, write down 80 containers. And so the manager has come up with this plan. And his plan is that in the future, when he is out of work, of course, he'll go to these various debtors' houses, knock on their door, and say, hey, remember me? You remember the good turn that I gave you when you owed all that money to my master? Now it's time for you to pay up. And so we have to remember that this is a culture of reciprocity. And so he's expecting them to do him a good turn as he did them a good turn. Now, this raises all kinds of questions for us as we think about this. This is the part of the story that's kind of hard to swallow. It says that when the master finds out about this, that he commends the dishonest steward or manager for acting shrewdly. And all kinds of questions begin to pop into our heads. First of all, how does the master find out? Second, why would the master commend his manager for acting dishonestly? That doesn't make sense, especially if he's losing stuff in the process, if it's at his own expense. And is Jesus in this parable saying that we should be dishonest? Is that what he's asking us to do? Now, some scholars have tried to get around some of these issues, these problems, by suggesting that the manager is simply taking off his own commission, that he's removing the commission that he would have normally received. Yeah, but there's a couple of points, I think, that would argue against that. First of all, a 50% commission, as in the case of the first debtor, remember it was his debt was cut by 50%. That would be extremely generous for any manager, especially one in the first century. Second, if he was due a commission on these debts anyway, well then he would have had money to live off of in the future. And thirdly, if you look closely at the way this is described, where he's kind of looking around and then he says, quick, sit down and write, that sounds like this particular behavior is a little bit unscrupulous, that he's trying to get something done in secret. So at this point, it would be important to remember that this story is a parable. It's not a real story, right? And so probably in real life, no rich guy would in any way praise this dishonest manager. But the very awkwardness of that element is what draws our attention to it. And that's the point of parables. It's the hard bits that cause us to look twice and that say, what's going on there? That doesn't seem normal or realistic or natural. Why in the world would the master praise him? In fact, what is he doing that is praiseworthy? And so that's the point that we're supposed to see. That's the particular element that Jesus wants us to focus in on. And so what is it that he does that the master praises? Well, remember, he doesn't praise him for being a great manager or for being honest. He says, you're shrewd. You're shrewd. Well, what did he do? The manager has used the resources under his control currently, in the present, to prepare for his future. And the particular way in which he uses those resources for preparing for his future is by giving them away. The manager is praised for his shrewdness because he realizes that sometimes the best way to prepare for the future is not to hold on tightly to what you have now, but to actually let it go. Now, some might argue, yeah, but the stuff he's giving away isn't his own stuff. And that's exactly the point. That's the connection that Jesus wants us to see. That's why he has constructed the parable this way. You see, he's creating an analogy between this story and the situation of Christians, of Jesus' followers. Because the rich man represents God. And his people have been entrusted with resources. And they're not our possessions. They're simply given to us in trust. And our job here on earth is to use God's stuff for his glory. And the way we do that is to give it away so that we might find treasure in the future. Look at verse 9 of the text. It says this, I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Now, this phrase, dishonest wealth, is translated in some versions as worldly wealth, and it's from a Greek phrase, unrighteous mammon. And that simply is a shorthand for riches of this earth. It's not that they were dishonestly gained. It's simply saying the stuff of this earth, earthly riches, as opposed to the true riches that are in heaven. Those are the kinds of things that he's making contrast here. So disciples are to make friends of themselves, just like the dishonest manager did, by giving stuff away. And the eternal homes it's talking of course, is this heavenly home that we're looking forward to, this heavenly reward. So the idea here that this parable is presenting is that you use your earthly stuff to gain a heavenly reward by giving it away. Now, that's not meant to be formulaic or any kind of magical kind of thing, as I'll mention in a minute. But I want you to recognize that this theme pervades Luke's gospel. That throughout the gospel, stuff is very important, and that what you do with your stuff is to give it away. So let's highlight two specific texts that communicate this message directly. Look at Luke chapter 12, verse 33. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. Or look at Luke 18, verse 22. When Jesus heard this, he said to him, there is still one thing lacking. This is the rich young ruler. Sell all that you own and distribute the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. Very same scenario, that if you want treasure in heaven, how do you get it? You give stuff away here on earth. This is part of a broader theme throughout the gospel, and there's all kinds of texts that deal with this issue, where when you hold on to possessions tightly, then you are kind of self-centered, but you're encouraged to let go of that and use it for the benefit of others. You might remember this line from the Sermon on the Plain. This is Luke 6, verse 27. From the one taking your outer coat, do not withhold even your inner garment. Give to everyone asking you. From the one taking your things, do not demand them back, but lend, expecting nothing back. And in the broader context, it becomes very clear why you are to do this. And the reason is because that's the way God acts with humans. That God is kind even to the ungrateful and wicked. That God is a generous God, and therefore His children, one would assume, would also be generous. Remember the story in Luke 10, verse 29 and following, of the Good Samaritan, who aids his enemy by bandaging his wounds and paying for his lodging. Or in Luke 14, verse 12 and following, where Jesus gives advice to the Pharisees about how to properly host a banquet. And he says, when you give a lunch or a dinner, don't invite those who are friends or relatives or rich neighbors, but instead, he says, invite the poor and the lame and the crippled and the blind. And the specific reason Jesus gives is because if you invite the friends and relatives, they will pay you back, and you will have received your reward here on earth. But if you invite those who can't repay you, then you will be given a more eternal reward. Now let me offer one final example from Luke, and that's the story of Zacchaeus, Luke 19. We find here the conversion of a chief tax collector, and of course, when he follows Jesus, all the crowds begin to grumble because they're upset that Jesus has friended this tax collector. And so Zacchaeus, when he hears the grumbling, he stops and he reveals to the crowd the kind of change that has occurred in his own life. And the very change that has occurred is symbolized by his statement that he now is going to give away his stuff. He pledges half his possessions to the poor. And if he's defrauded anyone, he's going to give back 4 times as much. You see, for Luke, in his gospel, disciples are revealed by their use of possessions. Let me say that again. In Luke's gospel, you can tell if someone is a follower of Jesus or not by how they use their stuff. It is the litmus test of whether they follow Jesus or not. For those who follow Jesus are characterized by generosity in what they do with their material goods. They're constantly giving it away to help the needs of others. And I think it's a point that we ourselves need to remember. They're not giving stuff away because stuff is bad in and of itself. It's not that material goods are wrong or evil or, something like that. It's that when we hold on to stuff in the face of the needs around us, it reinforces a self-centered attitude. It causes us to think that we're more important than all those other people in need. So let's go back to Luke 16 and see where Jesus makes two final points. Look at verses 10 and following. We find that riches are given as a test. Verse 10. Whoever is faithful in very little is faithful also in much. And whoever is dishonest in very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, remember that's just earthly riches, who will entrust you with true riches? That's the heavenly reward. And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? You see, we're simply temporary managers who've been given a tryout by God. The underlying principle is that the one who is faithful in this little stuff, this earthly wealth that we've been entrusted with, will also be faithful in much, meaning the heavenly reward. But if you're untrustworthy in this little stuff, in this earthly riches, who can entrust you with the true reward, the heavenly reward? The true thing. You look at verse 13. Here's where we perhaps find out the fundamental reason for this connection between wealth and discipleship. No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. See, God and money are portrayed as these competing masters, and one's loyalty cannot be divided. You can't decide to try and follow both. And the problem is often we treat riches like a god, and we devote time to acquiring it, and we spend time caring for it and our stuff. We believe that they have the power, that wealth and property and goods have the power to make us happy, to give us fulfillment. But only God can give us true fulfillment, true happiness. So how do we avoid placing wealth in a position that only God should occupy? How do we avoid letting wealth become our idol? The solution of Jesus is very simple. Continually give it away. Those who serve wealth are more focused on self than on God. And the way to avoid wealth being our God is to give it away. We're to be conduits of God's resources, to be funneled to others who are in need. I often use this illustration with my students where I think of God as a mother who has come out to the backyard where her son and the neighborhood children are playing, and she hands the son a plate full of chocolate chip cookies. And the son begins to eat the chocolate chip cookies, looking at his friends all around him saying, I'm so sad that you don't have a mother who loves you like mine does, as he eats chocolate chip cookie after chocolate chip cookie. Not realizing, of course, that the mother intended for him to share all those chocolate chip cookies. That's kind of like us. Now, some practical considerations. I think, as we think about wealth and money and goods and so forth, many Americans are simply out of control with their money. There's too many who are in debt, deep debt, and they can't control where their money is. They're just paying off the next bill. And they've developed a pattern where they buy what they want and not what they can afford. And so one of the first things that we need to do is we need to get our own house in order. We need to be able to control our debt. We need to learn to budget so that we have resources to share with others, so that giving can be a regular part of our lives, not simply, oh, when you see the homeless man on the street, you give him $1 and then you feel good for the next month. Where all the time you are giving to others. Secondly, so number one would be get a budget, get out of debt, control your resources. Number two, keep the needs of others always before you. The use of money is always about choices. When we go shopping, of course, we make choices all the time. Do I get the name brand or do I get the generic brand? Do I get the standard version or the deluxe model? What kind of package deal can I get? We're making choices of how we're going to spend our money all the time. And so what we need to begin to do is to start thinking in different ways and recognize that every dollar we spend on ourselves is a dollar that we can't spend on someone else. So maybe you go into the coffee shop, in a small example, and you really want that grande latte, but then you think to yourself, I could get the smaller version, or I'll pocket the difference and save that in my little savings jar until I can help someone else with that. Now you might be thinking, well, who thinks that way? That's a really strange way to think. And I would say, well, hopefully you think that way. At least you begin to think that way. You begin to recognize that you're entrusted with a great resource. And it's your decision how to use it, but that God wants you to see the needs of others all around you. He wants you to begin to recognize that you have the power to help and to serve and to alleviate needs and hunger and destitution. Now, notice what I'm saying here. It's not that you give away all your stuff. No. Because then you become that destitute person that we all have to help. And, that's not helpful for us. But what we are advocating is incorporating the needs of others in your mental picture, your mental calculation. That you're not just thinking about yourself, but you're thinking about this broader picture. And that becomes a motivating force continually for you. I'll ask the praise team to come back up as we close out here. So, what is Luke telling us? Or what is Luke telling us Jesus wants us to do? He's saying that disciples are revealed by their stuff. And I want to be very clear here that this is not a sermon that says, well, if you give stuff away, you're going to become richer, that God will bless you because of that. We give because they need it, because others need it. But we also give because it's the only way that we can free ourselves from this idol. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves entrapped and enslaved to something that is not God.